Sarah Martinez stared at the rejection letter in her hands, the words blurring as tears threatened to spill. For the third time in 6 months, her application for the Griffin HX-9 security clearance had been denied. The Elite Military Access program was known for its impossible standards, but Sarah had believed her background in cybersecurity and her spotless military record would be enough. The other officers in the break room pretended not to notice her disappointment, but she could hear their whispered conversations. "She's been trying for over a year," someone muttered. "Maybe she should accept that some doors aren't meant to open." Another voice added, "The Griffin program isn't for everyone. It takes a special kind of person." Sarah crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash bin with more force than necessary. She had graduated top of her class from the Defense Intelligence Academy, spent 4 years as a signals intelligence analyst, and had recommendations from 3 different commanding officers. Yet somehow, she kept falling short of whatever mysterious criteria the Griffin Selection Committee demanded. Her supervisor, Colonel Hayes, appeared in the doorway. He was a kind man in his 50s who had always supported her career, but even he looked skeptical when he saw her expression. "Another rejection?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Maybe it's time to focus on other opportunities," he suggested. "There are plenty of important roles that don't require Griffin access." But Sarah couldn't let go. The Griffin HX-9 program wasn't just another security clearance. It was the gateway to protecting the highest levels of military leadership, including direct access to general staff and classified operations that could change the course of national security. She had dreamed of this role since joining the military, imagining herself as part of the elite team that stood between danger and the people who made the most critical decisions for the country. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at her computer screen. The Griffin application portal was still open, taunting her with its bright blue Apply Again button. The program allowed unlimited applications, but each rejection felt like a personal judgment on her worth. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "How did it go?" Sarah typed back a simple, "No luck," and set the phone aside. She thought about her father who had served in Vietnam and always told her that the military was about more than following orders. "It's about finding where you belong and fighting for the chance to serve," he had said. Sarah realized she hadn't been fighting hard enough. She had been submitting applications like everyone else, following the standard procedures, and hoping her credentials would speak for themselves. The next morning, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of sulking or giving up, she began researching every publicly available detail about the Griffin program. She studied the backgrounds of officers who had been accepted, analyzed the types of assignments they received, and even tracked down a few retired Griffin operatives who were willing to share their experiences over coffee. What she discovered surprised her. The program wasn't just looking for technical skills or perfect records. They wanted people who could think differently, who could spot patterns others missed, and who had the courage to act when everyone else hesitated. Sarah realized her rejections might not have been about her qualifications at all. Maybe they had been testing her persistence and determination. Armed with this new understanding, Sarah began preparing her 4th application. This time, she wouldn't just list her accomplishments. She would tell her story in a way that showed exactly why the Griffin program needed someone like her. She worked late into the night, crafting essays that revealed her unique perspective and demonstrated her unconventional problem-solving abilities. 3 weeks later, Sarah submitted her application with a mixture of hope and resignation. She had done everything she could think of, but she also knew that some battles were won through patience rather than force. As she clicked the submit button, she whispered a small prayer and tried to prepare herself for another possible rejection. The waiting period stretched on for weeks. Sarah threw herself into her regular duties, trying not to think about the application sitting in some committee's inbox. Her colleagues had stopped asking about her Griffin attempts, assuming she had finally given up. Even Colonel Hayes seemed surprised when he saw her working late on advanced security protocols that went far beyond her current clearance level. "Planning ahead?" he asked one evening, finding her still at her desk long after the office had emptied. "Always," Sarah replied with a small smile. She had learned that preparation was never wasted, whether or not the Griffin program ever accepted her. The skills she was developing and the knowledge she was gaining would serve her well in any role. But deep in her heart, she still held on to the hope that her fourth attempt would be different. Little did Sarah know that her application was already making its way through a very different evaluation process than her previous attempts. Someone on the selection committee had noticed the pattern of her rejections and approvals from other candidates, and questions were being raised about whether the Griffin program was missing talented individuals due to outdated selection criteria. Sarah's persistence was about to pay off in ways she never could have imagined, but first she would face the biggest test of her career. The Griffin program was about to need exactly the kind of person they had been rejecting, and Sarah Martinez was about to prove that sometimes the most important qualities can't be measured by conventional standards. The phone rang at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jolting Sarah from a deep sleep. She fumbled for the device, squinting at the unknown number displayed on the screen. Military personnel learned early to answer unknown calls promptly, as they often carried urgent orders or emergency situations. "Lieutenant Martinez?" The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, with an authority that immediately commanded attention. "This is Colonel Rebecca Stone from the Griffin Selection Board. I need you to report to Building 7, Room 304 at 800 hours. Come in dress uniform." Sarah sat up straight in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Colonel Stone, is this about my application?" she asked, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. "We'll discuss everything when you arrive. This is time-sensitive, Lieutenant. Can you be here in 2 hours?" The colonel's tone gave nothing away, but the urgency in her voice was unmistakable. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be there," Sarah replied, but the line had already gone dead. Sarah stared at the phone for a moment, wondering if she had imagined the entire conversation. The Griffin Selection Board never called applicants directly. Their communications always came through official letters or secure emails. Something unusual was happening, and Sarah wasn't sure whether to feel excited or terrified. She showered quickly and put on her dress uniform with extra care, making sure every detail was perfect. As she drove to the base, her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe they were finally accepting her application, or perhaps they were calling her in to explain why she kept getting rejected. Either way, this was her chance to make a personal impression. Building 7 was one of the older structures on the base, housing several classified departments that most personnel never had reason to visit. Sarah had walked past it countless times but never been inside. The security checkpoint was more thorough than usual, with multiple ID verifications and a complete background check that took nearly 15 minutes. Room 304 was small and windowless, furnished with only a conference table and 4 chairs. Colonel Stone was already waiting when Sarah arrived. She was a woman in her early 40s with sharp features and intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate everything around her. 2 other officers sat at the table, neither of whom Sarah recognized. "Lieutenant Martinez, thank you for coming on short notice," Colonel Stone began. "I'm going to be direct with you. Your application for Griffin HX9 access has been under review for reasons that have nothing to do with your qualifications." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Ma'am, I don't understand." "The Griffin program has been experiencing some internal challenges," Colonel Stone continued. "We've discovered that our selection process may have been compromised. Several individuals who should never have received access were approved, while qualified candidates like yourself were repeatedly rejected." One of the other officers, a major with graying temples, leaned forward. "We've been conducting an internal investigation for the past 6 weeks. What we found suggests that someone has been manipulating the selection process for personal gain." Sarah's mind struggled to process this information. "Are you saying my rejections weren't legitimate?" "We're saying that your applications were never fairly evaluated," Colonel Stone replied. "Your qualifications exceed those of many current Griffin operatives. The question now is whether you're interested in helping us fix this problem." The room fell silent as Sarah absorbed the weight of what she was hearing. The Griffin program which she had viewed as the pinnacle of military service, had been corrupted from within. Her repeated rejections suddenly made sense, but they also revealed a much larger problem. "What kind of help are you looking for?" Sarah asked carefully. The third officer, a quiet woman with captain's bars, spoke for the first time. "We need someone with your technical background to help us trace how the system was compromised. More importantly, we need someone who understands what it feels like to be shut out unfairly. You'd be working directly with the investigation team." Colonel Stone added, "This isn't a typical Griffin assignment. It's dangerous, both professionally and personally. If word gets out that you're helping with this investigation, there could be retaliation from whoever is behind the manipulation. But it's also an opportunity to ensure that future candidates are evaluated fairly." Sarah thought about all the nights she had spent doubting herself, wondering what she was missing that prevented her from joining the Griffin program. Now she learned that her self-doubt had been manufactured by someone else's corruption. The anger that rose in her chest was sharp and focused. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "At least 2 years, possibly longer," the major replied. "We estimate that dozens of qualified candidates were rejected while unqualified individuals were given access to classified operations. Some of those operations may have been compromised as a result. The implications were staggering. National security decisions had been influenced by people who shouldn't have been in those positions, while capable officers like Sarah had been sidelined. The corruption hadn't just affected individual careers, it had potentially put the entire country at risk." "There's something else," Colonel Stone said, her voice dropping slightly. "General Harrison, who oversees all Griffin operations, doesn't know about this investigation yet. We have reason to believe that someone close to him may be involved in the corruption. We need to gather evidence before we can approach him with our findings." Sarah realized she was being offered more than just a chance to join the Griffin program. She was being asked to help expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military leadership. It was exactly the kind of challenge she had always hoped for, but it came with risks she had never imagined. "When would I start?" she asked, already knowing what her answer would be. Colonel Stone smiled for the first time since Sarah had entered the room. "Your temporary Griffin clearance is already being processed. You'll be officially part of the investigation team by tomorrow morning. But, Lieutenant, once you accept this assignment, there's no backing out. You'll be committed to seeing it through, regardless of where the evidence leads us." Sarah thought about her father's words about finding where you belong and fighting for the chance to serve. This wasn't the path to the Griffin program she had imagined, but it felt like exactly where she was meant to be. "I accept," she said, without hesitation. The 3 officers exchanged glances, and Sarah caught a hint of relief in their expressions. Colonel Stone reached into a briefcase beside her chair and pulled out a thick folder marked with security classifications Sarah had never seen before. "Then welcome to Operation Clean Sweep, Lieutenant. Your real work begins now." Sarah's first day as a Griffin operative felt surreal. After months of rejection, she now found herself sitting in a secure facility with access to classified databases that few people ever saw. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had finally achieved her goal, but under circumstances she never could have predicted. Colonel Stone introduced her to the rest of the investigation team. There was Major Phillips, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience in military intelligence, and Captain Chen, a computer forensics expert who had discovered the first signs of the selection process manipulation. Together, they had been quietly building a case for 2 months. "The corruption runs deeper than we initially thought," Major Phillips explained as he spread files across the conference table. "We've identified at least 12 individuals who received Griffin access despite failing basic security requirements. Some had financial problems, others had questionable personal relationships, and a few had criminal backgrounds that should have disqualified them immediately." Sarah studied the files, recognizing some of the names from her time at various bases. "How did they get through the screening process?" she asked. Captain Chen pulled up a series of computer records on her laptop. "Someone with high-level access has been altering application files after the initial review. Rejection letters were being generated for qualified candidates, while approval letters went out to people who should never have passed the first round of evaluation. The manipulation was sophisticated, Colonel Stone added. Whoever did this understood the system well enough to make the changes look legitimate. They even created fake documentation to support the fraudulent approvals. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the scope of the conspiracy. How many qualified people were rejected because of this? We're still counting, but we estimate at least 40 candidates over the past 2 years, Major Phillips replied grimly. That represents a significant loss of talent and capability for the Griffin program. As Sarah dove deeper into the investigation, she began to understand why she had been chosen for this role. Her technical background in cybersecurity allowed her to trace digital fingerprints that others might miss, while her personal experience with rejection gave her insight into how the corruption had affected individual lives. The team worked in shifts around the clock, carefully documenting evidence while trying not to alert whoever was behind the scheme. Sarah found herself working late into the night, cross-referencing application records with security databases and financial reports. The pattern that emerged was both clear and disturbing. Look at this, Sarah said during a team meeting on her third day. She had discovered that many of the fraudulently approved candidates had one thing in common. They had all been recommended by the same person. Colonel Marcus Webb has personally endorsed 15 of the questionable approvals. Colonel Stone leaned forward with interest. Webb serves on the Griffin Selection Board. He would have the access needed to alter the records. But why would he do it? Captain Chen asked. What's his motivation? Major Phillips had been quietly reviewing Webb's personnel file. Financial problems, he said slowly. His wife has been battling cancer for the past 3 years. The medical bills would be enormous even with military insurance. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for Webb's situation, but it didn't excuse what he had done. If he's been taking money to approve unqualified candidates, he's put national security at risk for personal gain. The team spent the next several days building an airtight case against Webb. They traced financial transactions that showed suspicious payments into accounts linked to his family. They documented the pattern of his recommendations and how they correlated with the manipulated application records. Most damning of all, they found encrypted communications between Webb and several individuals who had received fraudulent approvals. But as they prepared to present their findings, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing the latest batch of communication intercepts, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Colonel Stone, she said urgently, I need you to see this immediately. The encrypted message she had decoded was brief but terrifying. Harrison, suspects. Move to Phase 2. Eliminate the investigation team if necessary. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Not only was General Harrison, the head of Griffin operations, not involved in the corruption, but he was apparently close to discovering it on his own. More importantly, whoever Webb was working with was prepared to use violence to protect their scheme. We're no longer just investigating corruption, Colonel Stone said grimly. We're now potential targets. Major Phillips immediately began implementing additional security measures for the team, while Captain Chen worked to trace the source of the threatening message. Sarah found herself thinking about her family and friends, people who could become collateral damage if the investigation was exposed. There's something else, Sarah said, studying the communication patterns more carefully. The messages to Webb are coming from inside the Pentagon. Whoever is behind this has very high-level access and connections. Colonel Stone made a decision that would prove crucial in the days ahead. We need to accelerate our timeline. If General Harrison is already suspicious, we should approach him with what we have rather than waiting for more evidence. But what if he's actually involved and this is all misdirection? Captain Chen asked. Sarah had been wondering the same thing, but her analysis of the communication pattern suggested otherwise. The messages about Harrison sound genuinely worried about his suspicions. If he were part of the conspiracy, they wouldn't need to hide their activities from him. The team agreed to approach General Harrison, but they would do it carefully and with full documentation of their findings. Sarah volunteered to be part of the presentation team, despite the obvious risks. Her unique perspective as someone who had been victimized by the corruption could help convince the general of the investigation's legitimacy. As they prepared for the meeting with Harrison, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 week. She had gone from being a rejected applicant to being a key investigator in a case that could reshape the entire Griffin program. More importantly, she had found exactly the kind of meaningful work she had always wanted to do. But she also understood that the most dangerous part of the investigation was just beginning. Webb and his accomplices wouldn't give up without a fight, and they had already shown they were willing to consider violence to protect their scheme. Sarah knew that the next few days would test not only her investigative skills but also her courage and determination. The meeting with General Harrison was scheduled for the following morning. As Sarah reviewed her notes one final time, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But she also knew they had no choice. The corruption had to be exposed, regardless of the personal cost. Tomorrow would bring answers, but it would also bring new dangers that none of them could fully anticipate. General Harrison's office was nothing like Sarah had imagined. Instead of the intimidating fortress she expected, it was a modest space filled with family photos and books about military history. The general himself was smaller than his reputation suggested, but his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions. "Colonel Stone," he said, standing to greet the investigation team, "your request for an emergency meeting was unusual. I hope you have good reason for the secrecy." Sarah felt her heart racing as Colonel Stone began the presentation. They had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but facing the most powerful person in the Griffin program added a weight to every word. The general listened without interruption as Stone outlined the evidence of corruption in the selection process. "You're telling me that my own selection board has been compromised for over 2 years?" Harrison asked when the presentation concluded. His voice was calm, but Sarah could see the anger building behind his eyes. "Yes, sir," Major Phillips replied. "We have documented evidence of systematic manipulation of the approval process, with Colonel Webb as the primary suspect." General Harrison walked to his window, staring out at the base courtyard where young soldiers were conducting morning exercises. Sarah wondered what he was thinking, how it must feel to learn that the program he oversaw had been corrupted from within. "Lieutenant Martinez," the general said suddenly, turning to face her. "Colonel Stone tells me you were rejected multiple times for Griffin access. How does it feel to learn that those rejections were fraudulent?" Sarah had prepared for this question, but the general's direct gaze made her earlier rehearsed answers seem inadequate. "Sir, it's difficult to describe. Part of me feels vindicated, but mostly I'm angry that so many qualified people were denied the chance to serve while unqualified individuals were put in positions where they could compromise national security." Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right answer. Personal grievances are less important than the mission." He returned to his desk and picked up a thick folder. "I've been conducting my own quiet investigation for the past month. Your evidence confirms suspicions I've had about several recent Griffin appointments." Sarah exchanged glances with the other team members. Their decision to trust Harrison appeared to have been correct, but the general's next words surprised everyone in the room. "What you don't know is that Colonel Webb approached me 3 weeks ago. He wanted to confess his involvement in the corruption scheme, but he claimed he was being blackmailed by someone with even higher authority." The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. Webb wasn't the mastermind behind the corruption. He was another victim of a larger conspiracy. "Who was blackmailing him?" Colonel Stone asked. He wouldn't say. Webb was terrified, claimed that his family would be harmed if he revealed the identity of his handler, but he did provide me with some documentation that supports your findings. Harrison opened the folder and spread several papers across his desk. Bank records, communication logs, and a list of individuals who received fraudulent approvals. Sarah studied the documents, recognizing many of the names from her own investigation. But there were new details that painted an even more disturbing picture of the conspiracy. "Sir," she said carefully, "our investigation uncovered communications suggesting that you were a target of suspicion. We were concerned that approaching you might compromise the case." Harrison's expression darkened. "I've been aware that someone was watching my activities. My communications have been monitored, My meetings have been reported, and I've noticed surveillance on my family. Whoever is behind this corruption scheme sees me as a threat." Captain Chen looked up from her laptop, where she had been cross-referencing the new evidence. "General, if Colonel Webb was being blackmailed, then the real mastermind is still active and still dangerous. They may know about our investigation." "They definitely know," Harrison replied grimly. "Yesterday I received a message warning me to stop asking questions about the Griffin selection process." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Major Phillips shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, if you're being threatened and we're continuing this investigation, we're all at risk. Maybe we should involve outside law enforcement." "Absolutely not," Harrison said firmly. "This corruption reaches high enough into the Pentagon that we can't be sure who to trust. We handle this internally, quietly and completely." Sarah found herself speaking before she fully realized what she was saying. "General, what if we use the corruption against itself? If the real mastermind thinks they can manipulate the Griffin system, maybe we can set a trap." Harrison studied her with new interest. "Explain your thinking, Lieutenant. We know they're watching you and they know about Colonel Webb's involvement. What if we feed them false information to make them think they're still in control while we gather evidence of their real identity?" Colonel Stone looked skeptical. "That's extremely dangerous. If we're wrong about who we can trust, we could expose our entire investigation." But General Harrison was nodding slowly. "It's risky, but it might be our best option. Lieutenant Martinez, you have a strategic mind. What kind of trap did you have in mind?" Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the general was asking her to lead the most critical phase of the investigation. "We stage a fake conflict between you and Colonel Webb. Make it look like you're pressuring him to reveal his accomplices, but actually have him feed false information to his handlers. Meanwhile, we monitor all communications to identify who's really giving the orders." "That could work," Captain Chen said, warming to the idea. "I can set up monitoring equipment to track all incoming and outgoing communications from Webb's location." Major Phillips remained cautious. "The risk is enormous. If the real mastermind realizes we're onto them, they could destroy evidence or worse, eliminate everyone involved in the investigation." General Harrison stood and walked around his desk, a gesture that somehow made the room feel more like a war council than a formal meeting. "Lieutenant Martinez is right. We can't solve this problem by playing it safe. The corruption has been going on too long and has compromised too many operations." He looked directly at Sarah. "I'm putting you in charge of planning and executing this operation. You understand the Griffin system from an outsider's perspective, and you've proven you can think strategically under pressure." Sarah felt a mixture of honor and terror at the responsibility being placed on her. "Sir, I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Harrison replied. "Because if this operation fails, it won't just be our careers at stake. National security has been compromised by this corruption, and people may have died as a result of unqualified individuals having access to classified operations." As the team began planning the details of their trap, Sarah realized that her journey from rejected applicant to lead investigator was about to face its ultimate test. The next phase of the operation would require her to outthink and outmaneuver someone who had successfully manipulated the military's most secure systems for years. But for the first time since receiving her first rejection letter, Sarah felt completely confident in her abilities. She had found her place in the Griffin program after all, just not in the way she had ever imagined. The plan Sarah devised was elegant in its simplicity, but terrifying in its implications. Colonel Webb would stage a heated confrontation with General Harrison, making it appear that he was being pressured to reveal his accomplices. During this fake argument, Webb would secretly communicate false information to his handlers, claiming that Harrison was close to exposing the entire conspiracy. "The key is making it believable," Sarah explained to the team during their final planning session. "Webb's handlers have to think they're getting genuine intelligence about our investigation, when actually they're being fed exactly what we want them to know." Colonel Stone looked concerned. "What if Webb can't pull this off? He's already terrified, and now we're asking him to actively deceive people who have threatened his family." Sarah had spent hours with Webb over the past 2 days, helping him understand his role in the operation. The man was genuinely remorseful about his involvement in the corruption, and his fear for his family's safety was obvious. But he also seemed relieved to finally have a chance to make things right. "He'll do it," Sarah said confidently. "Webb knows this is his only chance to protect his family and salvage what's left of his career." General Harrison entered the room carrying a briefcase filled with fake documents that would serve as bait for the real mastermind. "I've prepared false evidence suggesting that we're close to identifying the person behind the blackmail scheme. If our trap works, they'll be forced to act, and that's when we'll catch them." Captain Chen had spent the entire morning setting up surveillance equipment in Webb's office and home. "Everything is ready," she reported. "We'll be monitoring all of his communications, both electronic and physical. If someone tries to contact him, we'll know about it immediately." The staged confrontation between Harrison and Webb was scheduled for that afternoon. Sarah would be hidden in an adjoining office, coordinating the surveillance and ready to respond if anything went wrong. Major Phillips and Colonel Stone would be positioned at different locations around the base, prepared to follow anyone who might approach Webb after the fake argument. At precisely 2:09 p.m., General Harrison entered Webb's office for what appeared to be a routine meeting. Within minutes, their voices could be heard through the thin walls, growing louder and more heated with each exchange. "I know you're hiding something, Webb," Harrison shouted, loud enough for anyone in the hallway to overhear. "This corruption scheme goes beyond just you, and I want names." Webb's response was equally loud and defensive. "I've told you everything I know, General. I was just following orders, trying to protect my family." Sarah listened from her hidden position, impressed by how convincing both men sounded. To anyone listening, it would appear that Harrison was interrogating a desperate man who was about to break under pressure. The argument continued for another 20 minutes before Harrison stormed out of Webb's office, slamming the door behind him. For the trap to work, Webb now had to convince his handlers that he was in immediate danger of being exposed and needed help. Within an hour, Captain Chen reported the first response. "Webb just received an encrypted message," she whispered through Sarah's earpiece. "The sender is instructing him to meet at a location off base tonight at 9 p.m. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The trap was working, but now came the dangerous part. Webb would have to meet with his handler while the investigation team monitored from a distance, ready to identify and apprehend the person behind the corruption scheme. "Do we have the location?" Sarah asked. "An abandoned warehouse about 15 minutes from base," Major Phillips replied through the communication system. "It's isolated, which is good for surveillance, but bad if things go wrong." As evening approached, Sarah found herself reviewing every detail of the operation. They had backup plans for various scenarios, but she knew that real-world situations rarely unfolded exactly as expected. The person behind the corruption had managed to stay hidden for years, which suggested they were intelligent and cautious. At 8:30 p.m., Webb left his house and drove toward the meeting location. Sarah and the team followed at a distance using multiple vehicles to avoid detection. The warehouse district was dark and mostly empty, with only a few security lights creating pools of illumination in the surrounding darkness. "Target vehicle approaching the warehouse," and Captain Chen reported from her surveillance position. "Webb is parking on the east side of the building." Sarah positioned herself where she could observe the main entrance while remaining hidden behind a stack of shipping containers. Through her night vision equipment, she could see Webb walking nervously toward the building, carrying the briefcase of fake evidence that Harrison had prepared. "Movement on the north side," Major Phillips whispered through the communication system. "Someone just entered the building through a side door." Sarah's heart rate increased as she realized the moment of truth was approaching. After months of investigation, they were about to identify the person who had corrupted the Griffin program and threatened national security. Webb disappeared inside the warehouse, and for several minutes, the surveillance team could only wait and listen to the audio feed from the wire he was wearing. The conversation that emerged from their headphones was both revealing and terrifying. "You've been careless, Colonel," a woman's voice said calmly. "General Harrison is more suspicious than we anticipated." Sarah recognized the voice immediately, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. The person behind the corruption wasn't some unknown Pentagon official or foreign agent. It was Colonel Rebecca Stone, the same woman who had recruited Sarah for the investigation team. "Colonel Stone is the mastermind," Sarah whispered urgently into her microphone. Repeat. Colonel Stone is the target. She's inside the building with Webb. The implications were staggering. Stone had been running the investigation while simultaneously being the person they were investigating. She had access to all their evidence, knew all their plans, and had been manipulating the operation from the beginning. All units converge on the warehouse, Major Phillips ordered. We need to apprehend Stone before she realizes we know her identity. But as Sarah moved toward the building, she heard Stone's voice through Webb's wire becoming more menacing. I think General Harrison has been getting help with his investigation, Colonel. Someone with technical skills and a personal grudge against the Griffin program. Sarah realized with growing horror that Stone was talking about her. The fake investigation had been a setup to identify and eliminate anyone who might threaten the corruption scheme. Sarah and the entire team had walked directly into a trap. Webb, you need to get out of there now, Sarah said into her microphone, knowing that Webb could hear her through his earpiece. Stone knows about the investigation. But Webb's response revealed the true scope of their predicament. I'm sorry, Lieutenant Martinez, he said sadly. Colonel Stone explained everything to me before we started this charade. You and your team were never investigating corruption. You were the targets all along. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized the full extent of Stone's deception. The investigation had been real, but Stone had been using it to identify and eliminate threats to her operation. Now Sarah and the team were trapped in an isolated location with a person who had already demonstrated she was willing to kill to protect her secrets. As armed figures began emerging from the shadows around the warehouse, Sarah knew the most dangerous. Part of her Griffin experience was just beginning. Sarah's mind raced as armed figures closed in around the warehouse. Colonel Stone's elaborate deception had put the entire investigation team in mortal danger, but Sarah refused to accept that their mission was over. Years of rejection and doubt had taught her to find solutions when others saw only problems. Major Phillips, Captain Chen, she whispered into her microphone. Stone doesn't know that General Harrison isn't with us. He's our ace in the hole, but only if we can stay alive long enough for him to realize what's happening. Through her earpiece, she could hear Stone continuing her conversation with Webb inside the warehouse. The beauty of this operation, Stone was saying, is that everyone will believe the investigation team died trying to apprehend dangerous corruption suspects. Their deaths will actually strengthen my position. Sarah realized that Stone had planned to eliminate them from the moment she recruited Sarah for the team. The investigation had been real, but it was designed to identify threats to Stone's operation, rather than expose corruption. Webb's confession to General Harrison had been orchestrated to flush out anyone who might be investigating independently. We need to turn this around, Sarah said quietly. Stone thinks she's eliminated the threat, but she doesn't know that Harrison has been conducting his own investigation. If we can get evidence to him, he can bring in outside help. Major Phillips responded grimly through the communication system. Sarah, we're outnumbered and outgunned. I count at least 6 armed individuals surrounding the building. How do you propose we get out of here alive? Sarah studied the warehouse layout, remembering her technical training and the countless hours she had spent analyzing security vulnerabilities. The building has an old storm drainage system that connects to the main base infrastructure. If we can reach the tunnels, we can get word to General Harrison. Captain Chen's voice was tense but determined. The drainage access is on the south side of the building, but we'd have to cross open ground to reach it. That's a lot of exposure. Not if we create a distraction, Sarah replied, formulating a plan that felt desperate but possible. Stone wants us alive for questioning before she eliminates us. That gives us a small window of opportunity. Through Webb's wire, they could hear Stone giving orders to her accomplices. Bring them in alive. I need to know exactly what they've discovered and who else might be involved before we finish this. Sarah made a decision that would either save the team or get them all killed. Major Phillips, I'm going to surrender myself to Stone. While she's interrogating me, you and Captain Chen make your way to the drainage tunnels and contact General Harrison. Absolutely not, Phillips replied immediately. I won't sacrifice a team member, especially not someone under my command. It's not your choice, Sarah said firmly. I'm the one Stone recruited personally. She'll want to question me more than anyone else. That gives you the best chance to escape and warn Harrison." Before Phillips could argue further, Sarah stepped out from behind the shipping containers with her hands raised. "Colonel Stone," she called out loudly, "I know you can hear me. Let's talk." The armed figures immediately converged on her position, but Stone's voice came through a loudspeaker from inside the warehouse. "Lieutenant Martinez, how refreshing to see someone with the courage to face reality. Come inside and bring your colleagues with you." "They're not here," Sarah lied smoothly. "Phillips and Chen were monitoring from the base. I came alone because I suspected something was wrong with our investigation." There was a long pause before Stone responded. "Search the area thoroughly," she ordered her accomplices. "If Martinez is lying, find the others." Sarah was escorted into the warehouse where she found Stone standing beside a table covered with documents and electronic equipment. Webb sat in a chair nearby, looking miserable but unharmed. The setting looked like a command center for a military operation, which Sarah realized it essentially was. "You've been impressive throughout this entire process," Stone said as Sarah was forced into a chair across from her. "Your persistence in applying for Griffin access, your analytical skills during the investigation, your strategic thinking about the trap we set. It's almost a shame that you chose the wrong side." "The wrong side?" Sarah asked, genuinely confused. "I chose to investigate corruption and protect national security," Stone laughed coldly. "You chose to investigate a profitable business arrangement that was providing valuable intelligence to people who could use it effectively. The individuals I approved for Griffin access weren't unqualified, Lieutenant. They were assets working for an organization that pays very well for classified information." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. Stone wasn't just running a corruption scheme. She was operating a spy network within the United States military. The Griffin program had been compromised not for money, but for espionage purposes. "You're selling classified information to foreign governments," Sarah said, her voice barely containing her anger. "I'm providing information to parties who can make better use of it than our own bureaucratic government," Stone corrected. "The intelligence community is slow, inefficient, and often wrong. My clients act decisively and pay generously for timely information." Sarah forced herself to remain calm while her mind processed this revelation. Stone's spy network was far more dangerous than simple corruption. If foreign agents had been accessing Griffin-level intelligence for 2 years, the damage to national security could be catastrophic. "How long have you been planning to eliminate me?" Sarah asked, trying to buy time for Phillips and Chen to reach the drainage tunnels. "Since the day I recruited you," Stone replied matter-of-factly. "Your rejection letters were my idea, designed to create exactly the kind of resentment and determination that would make you perfect for this operation. I needed someone smart enough to conduct a real investigation, but naive enough to trust me completely." Webb spoke for the first time since Sarah had entered the warehouse. "She told me that eliminating the investigation team was necessary to protect both our families. I believed her until I realized she was planning to kill me too after this was over." Stone's expression hardened. "Colonel Webb has outlived his usefulness, as have you, Lieutenant. But first I need to know exactly what evidence you've gathered and whether General Harrison suspects my involvement." Sarah realized that Stone's confidence might be her weakness. The spy network leader believed she had complete control of the situation, but she didn't know about Harrison's independent investigation or the monitoring equipment Chen had installed. "Harrison doesn't suspect anything," Sarah lied. "He thinks you're investigating corruption just like I did. The evidence we gathered points to Webb as the mastermind, exactly as you planned." Stone studied Sarah's face carefully, looking for signs of deception. "If that's true, then eliminating you and your team will end any threat to my operation." At that moment, Sarah heard a sound that filled her with both hope and terror. The building's fire alarm system activated, creating a deafening noise that echoed through the warehouse. It was the signal Phillips and Chen had agreed upon to indicate they had successfully contacted General Harrison. Stone's expression changed from confidence to concern as she realized the alarm meant her plan was falling apart. "Shut off that alarm," she shouted to her accomplices. But Sarah knew it was too late. Through the warehouse windows, Sarah could see military vehicles surrounding the building. General Harrison had arrived with a full tactical team, and Stone's carefully planned operation was about to become a disaster for the spy network. "You've lost, Colonel," Sarah said with quiet satisfaction. "The evidence of your espionage operation is already in General Harrison's hands, and every one of your assets is about to be arrested." Stone drew her sidearm and pointed it at Sarah. "Maybe, but you won't live to see it." As Stone's finger tightened on the trigger, Sarah threw herself sideways just as the warehouse doors exploded inward. Military tactical teams flooded the building, and in the confusion that followed, Sarah finally understood what it meant to be a true Griffin operative. She had protected General Harrison and the integrity of the program against impossible odds, using nothing but her determination and the skills that had been rejected so many times before. As Stone was taken into custody and the spy network unraveled, Sarah realized she had found her place in the Griffin program after all.